If you're after a light city car, the Kia Picanto should definitely be on the top of your list. In fact, this car makes up around 70% of sales in the microcar segment, which probably explains why Kia has added an all-new variant, and that's the GT. So gone is that naturally aspirated 1.25 litre engine and replaced with a 1 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged unit. Let's get in and see how it goes. So the first thing you should know about this car is that it only costs $18,000 drive away, and that's pretty good considering this is pitched as a GT car. And that's about the same price as the automatic GT line, which is, I guess, quite sensible because this carries the same equipment level as that car. In fact, the only differences between the GT and the GT line are the engine, the power steering system, and the suspension. So you're not really getting that much more in this car. And I have to be honest, that 1 litre engine up the front, look, it sounds pretty good. Let's have a listen. But as you could probably tell, that was full throttle and it doesn't really go very far. Kia won't give me a 0 to 100 figure, but I believe it's around the 10-second mark. And if you know much about cars, 10 seconds is a very long time. You're going to get 74 kilowatts of power and 172 newton meters of torque. Look, this car weighs just a little bit over a ton, so the power to weight ratio isn't terrible. But when you actually start to accelerate, it doesn't really feel like it's going to go very far. And then when it comes to changing gears, you're dealing with possibly, and I don't say this lightly, one of the worst gearboxes I have ever used. It has got the longest throw, but also it just doesn't feel right. It's so loose. You can move the gear stick while it's in gear. There's nothing really that sporty about it necessarily. So although it's called the GT, it's more about fun than outright performance. On the plus side though, what Kia Australia has done with the localized tuning is give this car a lot of good dynamic ability. So what I mean by that is going around some of the twisty stuff, as we are doing today, it really handles quite nicely. Now the necks and tires are perhaps its biggest Achilles heel, but otherwise in terms of the chassis and the balance of the car, it actually drives quite well. And the thing I love about this, which is I guess something that you could consider if you're buying one of these, is that because the limits of the car aren't really that high, you can drive it on the edge quite frequently. So you can be going flat out. Your foot could be flat on the accelerator for long periods of time as you're going through these twisty, windy roads, and that really is a hell of a lot of fun. Like being able to go flat out in a car through a twisty mountain road whilst you're probably only going the speed limit is actually exhilarating. I love it. As for the interior, I gotta say I'm pretty impressed by a car that cost only $18,000. You got Apple CarPlay and Android Auto from this very super clear screen here. You got a fair bit of room. I like the red highlights on the seats and the red stitching, even if it might not be real. Look, there's a lot of scratchy plastics, but then again, it's $18,000. Like, what are you expecting, really? On the safety front, it has autonomous emergency braking, which is a huge bonus for a car like this. And personally, if I was buying a new car, I would never touch a car that doesn't have that feature. It is rated only a 4-star ANCAP from 2017, so not the current regime we have in 2019. It's actually structurally quite good. Where ANCAP picked on it was in terms of child safety in the rear and pedestrian protection. So if you're driving this yourself in the city and it's your first car, look, it's probably a pretty safe bet, and certainly a much better bet than any used car in a similar price range. At the end of the day though, I'm really struggling to understand the point of this car. I get that it's sporty, I get that it handles really well, but they have definitely compromised the ride quality to get that sporty handling. So it doesn't really ride that nicely over crappy roads, which is pretty much most of Australian suburbia. So if you buy one of these, you have to consider the fact, how often are you going to drive it flat out enthusiastically around a twisty road, and how often are you going to drive it in inner city? And if the answer is you're going to drive it more inner city than you are out in the mountains, maybe just buy a normal Picanto GT line, because that is a great car, and you don't get the compromise of ride. So, but if you just like to have a little hot hatch that is kind of warm and maybe lukewarm at best, it's quite small, looks good, and it's got a 7-year warranty, you still can't go wrong.